Hey everyone, and welcome to Crossing Kin. I'm Kristen. This is Star Wars Month, and this is part 2 of What If I Wrote the Star Wars sequel trilogy. Dad has been waylaid by Hondo's pirates. He's assured me he's okay and will be back soon, but I'm still on my own for today. If you've not seen part 1 of this video, check the card up here. It should take you right to it. But if you need just a real quick recap, the most important thing that you probably need to know is that Rey is now Rey Solo. She is Han and Leia's daughter and Ben's little sister. Let's take a look at The Last Jedi. Well, I wouldn't go so far as to call this a bad movie. It is a bit of a mess in places, and a lot of that has to do with the mass amounts of new characters that we're introduced to in this film. In the originals, we only had 1 or 2 newbies that we were supposed to get to know and get invested in per sequel. In the sequels, however, we're introduced to multiple new characters within the span of a few minutes. And apparently we're supposed to get invested within those few minutes because the writers seem to want us to actually care when they do stupid things and wind up dragging down the characters we loved from the last movie to levels of absurdity. These were people we met 2 minutes ago. Some we don't even know the name of. So it's sad when the bad thing happens or when they do the stupid thing, especially if they wind up dragging a main character down with them. But without any emotion behind it, there's nothing for the audience to connect to. If we go by the original's rule of only 1 or 2 newbies per sequel, then you give the audience a chance to actually care about the new faces without devaluing the newbie or dragging the established characters down to levels of absurdity. Especially if the newbie is well integrated into the established character's backstory, like Lando was with Han. All that being said, let's move on. The Last Jedi, renamed The Fallen. Yes, I have elected to change the title as I am basically going to change the whole plot. What I plan to do with the plot and the rest of the trilogy as a whole isn't going to set Rey up as The Last Jedi, so that title no longer makes sense. This one is going to be a bit more about how Luke has fallen into a depression and away from his family and life as a Jedi, and then falling to the dark side. It will also deal with the Resistance slightly beginning to fall apart. Several things are getting removed from this one. Not necessarily because they're bad. Please don't think I think these things are terrible. They just don't really work for my plot. The whole opening bomb run is gone. Since we aren't actively trying to ruin Poe as a character, and since we don't need to establish that Rose's sister is dead, it's unnecessary to the plot. Admiral Holdo won't be there at all either. I have nothing against Laura Dern. I think she was good in the film, but her character was only there to create conflict, and we don't need her. Sorry. The complete and utter destruction of Poe as a character is also going to be removed. Poe hopefully gets a better arc in my version, with him serving more as a Leia type character. Speaking of Leia, her Mary Poppins bit in space. I get that you wanted to show that she was a Jedi and could use the Force and all that, but there had to be a less cheesy way to do it, and we're going to find that way in my version. I promise. So, we're not throwing Leia out into space to then be Mary Poppins. We're not doing that. The hyperspace tracking, fuel crisis, and Holdo maneuver will all be scrapped as well. Those plot points just won't happen in this particular version. Canto Bight. That whole section and the character they went to get are gone here. They serve no purpose since, again, we've already established Rose and we won't need anything that section of The Last Jedi gave us. Porgs. I don't feel I need to say anything else. They are gone. I don't care if they exist, but they aren't in this movie. The big fight with Snoke's Red Guards at the end of the movie is removed as well, even though it was a cool fight in my opinion. Since Snoke's our big bad, we're not killing him off when we still have a movie apt to go after this one. So sadly, the really cool fight's gonna have to wait, but fear not, I've got one in mind. Like I said, I'm changing basically the whole plot, so let's get into it. The opening crawl is different as well. As news spreads throughout the galaxy of what the Resistance did at Starkiller Base, so too does the fear of the First Order. While Kylo Ren has returned to his master, Supreme Leader Snoke, to complete his training in the dark side of the Force, Captain Phasma and General Hux have begun a crackdown on any and all known and unknown allies of the Resistance. Their plan, to cut the Resistance off, ensuring that during a crisis they have nowhere to run. The Resistance is braced for an attack at any moment under the leadership of General Leia Organa, but with supplies running low after the battle and allies growing few, they are unsure of what lies ahead for them and the rest of the galaxy should the First Order attempt to tighten their grip further. Meanwhile, Rey Solo has traveled aboard the Millennium Falcon with Chewbacca and R2-D2 to Ahch-To in the hopes of finding her long-lost uncle, Luke Skywalker, and perhaps completing her Jedi training. We pick up where we left off. Rey is offering Luke Anakin's lightsaber. Luke takes it and says, "Thank you." Rey smiles. Luke frowns and starts to walk away, saying, "Now leave." Luke is not going to throw Anakin's lightsaber off the cliff. He's gruff, even rude to Rey, but he is not going to be disrespecting his father's lightsaber. Luke walks to his hut, and Rey follows after him, shouting, "Uncle Luke, it's me! It's Rey!" Luke reaches his door. He looks at Rey and tells her that he knows who she is. He felt her presence when she started using the Force again, but he wants no part of whatever she is there for. He doesn't believe that he's a Jedi anymore, nor is he a warrior. He just wants to be left alone to live and die in peace. He slams the door in her face. She pounds on the door for a minute. We focus on Luke, who is desperately trying to tune out Rey's voice. He is clearly a broken man, and even tears up as he looks at Anakin's lightsaber in his hands. That's when Chewie breaks down the door. He's angry and still very distraught over Han's death, and he tells Luke as much. When Luke hears that Han is dead, he looks to Rey for confirmation, and she tells him that both she and Chewie witnessed Han's murder at the hand of Kylo Ren. It should be noticed that she says Kylo Ren and not Ben. She's going to treat him in much the same way that Obi-Wan always treated Anakin. With Vader and Anakin being two different people, so too Kylo Ren and Ben Solo are two different people. Luke falls apart when he hears that Han is dead and practically passes out in Chewie's arms, crying and trying desperately to collect himself, which causes both Rey and Chewie to weep as well. A little bit later, we see Luke and Chewie on the Millennium Falcon. Luke will take Han's dice and look at the captain's chair. He'll shake his head and say, "I always thought you would die on this hunk of junk, Han. I'm so sorry." Luke will go sulk in the lounge where the Dejeric game is. R2 will play Leia's old message to try and motivate Luke to join the fight, like he did in The Last Jedi, which Luke will still call cheating. We go outside where Rey is repairing a frayed wire on the Falcon's ramp when suddenly from behind her she hears Ben's voice say her name. She turns, quickly drawing the blaster Han gave her in the first film, and she sees Ben, complete with a scar from their fight. She quickly realizes that it's just him talking to her through their connection and puts the blaster away. She's furious with him, but he tries to reason it as him freeing both of them from Han. Rey retorts that he didn't free himself. He just gave himself another scar, another ghost to haunt him. She begins to calm and says she knows that if he'd been in his right mind, he never would have killed their father, and she knows he regrets it. He denies this, but Rey says she can feel it. Even with her senses as weak as they are, she can feel how much Ben is hurting over what he did. Ben would turn away, still trying to deny what she says, and when he turns back to her, he asks where she is. She's not willing to say. Ben would smile at her trying to keep secrets from him, and he tells her that he's missed her. He missed being able to talk to her every night after training. She was always such a light and a calming presence to him. Rey says she misses him too, but if they're ever to see each other again, Kylo Ren would need to die and Ben Solo would have to live again. Ben doesn't believe that the two are mutually exclusive, but Rey is convinced that they are, and she is determined to save her brother. As a wave crashes behind Rey, blowing watery mist onto where Rey is standing, a red guard comes into Ben's room and tells him that the Supreme Leader is ready for him. Ben says he'll be right there, and the guard leaves. Ben looks back. He doesn't see Rey, but then he wipes his face and looks at the water on his glove. The ability to pass things through their connection stays in this version. We'll chalk it up to the fact that since they were able to train their connection a little bit better, it's much stronger than Luke and Leia's. Back on Ahch-To, Luke comes out of the Falcon with Chewie and R2 behind him. He says he thought he heard Rey talking to someone. Rey denies this, and then asks if he's reconsidered and is now willing to resume her training. Luke hands her Anakin's lightsaber and says she can stay and train if she wants. He owes Han that much. But he won't teach her. If she wants to learn, she'll have to train herself. Luke walks away, and Rey watches him with an almost defiant expression. "All right, I'll train myself then." We cut to the Resistance base. We see Poe landing, then getting out of his X-Wing as he unloads BB-8, looking tired and exhausted. He leans against the ship as Rose walks over to him. She looks at the state he's in and asks if he's still alive. Poe chuckles and says, "Barely. But all seemed quiet during my security run." We learn through their conversation that it's been a couple of weeks since the battle at Starkiller Base, and the Resistance is in a sort of holding pattern. Rose would also tell Poe how worn out he looks, to which Poe would say that it's his job, and until something changes, he'll do it, no matter how exhausting it is. This will establish Poe as a leader, willing to do what it takes to keep his people safe. Beaumont runs over to them and says that they need to come to the med bay quickly. Poe asks why, since he made it back in one piece. Rose will say, "Barely," getting a look from Poe in the process. And Beaumont will tell them that Finn is starting to wake up. The three of them will exchange a happy look and then run to the med bay with BB-8 rolling ahead of them. They get to the med bay and see Finn starting to sit up. Poe gives him a hug and BB-8 beeps happily. Poe remarks that he scared them for a minute and he was worried he was about to lose his new little brother. Finn smiles at this, but then his smile fades as he looks around, and then he asks, "Where's Rey?" We'll cut to Ben in Snoke's throne room. Its layout is very similar to how it was in The Last Jedi, but it will be much darker, making the light that is there stark and terrifying. It will also allow the red guards to stand out just a little bit more instead of kind of blending into the background. Snoke will rise from his throne as Ben takes off his mask and kneels. Snoke will ask if Ben can feel what his subordinates are doing as they speak. Ben shuts his eyes and focuses. We'll see images of Hux and Phasma leading a full-scale assault. They are mercilessly cutting their way through a village on what seems to be an unsuspecting world. Phasma will be making use of a fancy silver spear that zaps anyone who touches anywhere near its end. Ben will open his eyes and say that they are fulfilling his master's plan. Snoke chuckles, "As my Sith brothers and sisters did for the Emperor, and as you were supposed to do for me." Remember, in this version, Snoke was an Inquisitor. These are not biological siblings he cared for that he's talking about. There will be an implication at some point that he may have even killed one of them. He'll tell Ben that he can sense the conflict running through him. The regret and the sorrow over Han Solo's death is eating away at you. Ben will deny this, and Snoke will draw a double-bladed red lightsaber. It will look like Dark Rey's did in The Rise of Skywalker, as that was a cool design that was sadly wasted on like a 5-second vision sequence in its original context. And Snoke will say, "Prove it." Ben puts on his mask and they begin to fight. Snoke harshly instructs Ben with every strike. This should play as a bit of psychological torture. Every strike, every word, every perverse anecdote from Snoke will clearly affect Ben. At one point, Snoke will knock Ben's Kylo Ren mask right off his head, which dazes Ben, nearly getting him killed. Fortunately, he recovers quickly, which makes Snoke flash a twisted grin. The fight ultimately winds up with Ben on his knees and Snoke's saber at the back of his neck. Ben trembles slightly as the blade inches closer. Snoke will call him a weak, scared boy in a mask, using the Force to throw the Kylo Ren mask into Ben's line of sight. Snoke says that Ben will never be free until he lets go and fully gives himself to the dark side. He'll remind him of Rey and how she disappeared when he needed her most, Han and Leia, who were never there for him, and of Luke, who betrayed him above all. Ben will lash out, getting off his knees and nearly knocking the lightsaber away from Snoke in one strike. Snoke begins to laugh as Ben continues to hammer at him with rage-fueled strikes, but then Snoke uses the Force to push Ben back to his knees, painfully. This time facing him. Snoke will tell him, "That was better. Still not perfect, but better. I can still see the spark of potential that you had when we first met, but you've not yet reached it." He releases Ben from his Force hold and tells him he can return to his chambers for now. Ben picks up his Kylo Ren mask and heads to the lift. Han's voice asking Ben to let him help him echoes in Ben's mind as he looks at the mask. Rey's words about Ben Solo needing to live play in his mind, and then in his anger, he smashes the mask, leaving the pieces in the lift. We'll cut to black and have some text that says 5 months later. When we come back, we'll be at the Resistance base. We see Finn on his feet in the hangar at a communication panel with Leia. He's briefing her on the security flights that Poe and his squad have been conducting over the last 5 months, and all has been quiet. Maybe too quiet. Leia says she's heard from some of her contacts that many of their allying worlds have been overtaken by the First Order, and she fears that if the quiet comes to an end, there may not be anyone who can help them. Finn looks down and sighs. Leia can sense that there's more bothering him than what the First Order is up to, and his worry about Rey. Finn tells her that ever since he left the First Order, every time he sleeps, he dreams about being a child and getting ripped out of someone's arms. He says he never sees any faces, but whoever he gets pulled away from, he doesn't want to leave them. Leia smiles and suggests that maybe they aren't dreams, but memories. After all, you were taken and conditioned by the First Order from such a young age that whatever life you had before was a dim and distant memory. Now that you're free of them, perhaps the memories are trying to come back. Before Finn can respond to this, a woman's voice comes over the communication panel saying, "This is Shadow's Veil requesting permission to land." Finn and Leia smile at each other as Finn presses a button and says, "Permission granted. Welcome back, Shadow. See you in a minute." Finn looks at Leia, who tells him to find Poe, and they'll finish their conversation later. Leia walks away, and Finn heads over to Poe's X-Wing, which Poe and BB-8 are inspecting. Finn tells Poe about the ship coming in, and both Poe and BB-8 get excited. The ship lands just outside the hangar, and the three of them head over to it. A woman and a man that looks identical to Poe step out of the ship on a side where no one else can see them. Poe's doppelganger puts his arm around the woman as Finn, BB-8, and Poe reach them. He cracks a smile and says, "Sorry, Poe, but you've been replaced." The woman rolls her eyes and removes the double's arm from her shoulders. Finn chuckles. BB-8 repeatedly runs into the doppelganger's leg as if he's trying to stop him from looking like Poe. And Poe folds his arms and says, "Override command, 1 LVU. The doppelganger's Poe form fades away, revealing that it's a droid. This will be the same kind of droid as Proxy from the Force Unleashed video game. A holodroid complete with combat training. It will be explained through upcoming dialogue/reprimand from Poe that he is able to impersonate anybody he sees, and if he is able to learn about them, he can be a near perfect copy, being everything from a pilot to a world leader if that's what's required. The droid would say, "That's not fair." In my head, it's John Boyega using his natural British accent as the voice. And Poe asks the woman why she lets K4MO, if you can't tell that's a way of spelling camo, impersonate him like that. The woman smiles and says she doesn't let him do anything, though it is nice to see Poe's face whenever she wants. She hugs and kisses Poe, then turns to Finn and hugs him. Finn says, "It's good to see you again, Keela." Keela, who also goes by the nickname Key, is going to be what I believe the character of Zori Bliss from The Rise of Skywalker was supposed to be. A cool bounty hunter lady who wields a pair of blasters with a connection to Poe. BB-8, Finn, and Leia are the only ones that know the full extent of who she is. The rest of the Resistance know Keela, but are unaware of the depth of hers and Poe's relationship. The audience will remain similarly unaware until a reveal later. She'll have a similar personality to Zori, but she won't hide her face, she won't be nearly as standoffish, and again, it will be made clear through dialogue that she's sort of a spy for the Resistance. Keela is the she that Poe mentioned to Lore at the beginning of The Force Awakens. She doesn't want to get directly involved, but since Poe is practically second in command, she wants to make sure he has as much help as he needs to stay alive. And she comes to the base every few months to tell Poe what she's heard while she's working. Poe will say that he's thrilled to see her, but they weren't expecting her for at least another month. Key tells them that she needs to talk to Leia now. The boys can tell it's serious, so they all hurry inside. We go back to Act 2 and see that Rey is indeed training herself. Chewie and R2 are helping her. Chewie by shooting at her so she can work with the lightsaber, and R2 by letting him lift her with the Force. But it's clear that she's sloppy and needs someone to help her focus. We'll see that she runs a lot as part of this training as well. We'll see her running in the evening, and that's when she comes across the dark side pit. Yes, I'm keeping this, but it's going to be used more like the creepy forest in Empire to reveal something about her character and nature, rather than some sort of soul-searching mind trip. Rey seems fascinated by the pit. We see Luke behind her. He startles her by saying that the pit isn't something she should go near. She says she can feel the darkness, but it doesn't frighten her. Luke responds that maybe it should. Rey retorts that Jedi aren't supposed to be afraid, and Luke says, "There are no Jedi here." And he'll walk away from her again. This will demonstrate that Luke has utterly lost his faith in both himself and in the Force. He has no hope. He has been alone for so long and lost so much that it's all taken a great toll on him mentally. A little later, Rey's in her hut, and she and Ben connect again. He's clearly on a Star Destroyer, and he will have his shirt on because we are not going to do any incest baiting here. Thank you. Rey says that she's been worried about him since she hasn't heard from him in 5 months, and she'll comment that he looks terrible, which he does. Well, as terrible as you can look when you look like Adam Driver. He sort of brushes this off and says that he can feel her growing stronger and that he's proud of how fast she's learning. Rey gives him a look and replies that she would have learned all this a long time ago if it wasn't for him. Ben gets angry and says that it was Luke's fault. His anger will cause things around his room to be thrown against the walls by the Force. Rey asks how it was Luke's fault, and Ben reveals that Luke tried to kill him. Luke sensed a darkness in him, and rather than trying to help him, Luke tried to kill him in his sleep. Rey and we, the audience, will see this through their connection. It's clearly from Ben's point of view, and the events seem rather exaggerated. Rey doesn't believe him and says that he conjured those images. Ben says he's never lied to her in his life, and he doesn't intend to start now. Ray is still trying to sort everything out in her mind, which is when Ben will start in with the whole "let me be your teacher, I can help you, who become stronger" bit. And that's when Luke comes in, sees Ben, and draws his saber, which gets Ray's attention and causes Ben to disappear. Ray explains what was happening, and Luke shouts at her for allowing their connection to remain, saying that them talking could lead to him being found. Ray, who knows that Ben hasn't been able to find her, demands to know if it's true that Luke tried to kill Ben. Luke lowers his head with a guilty expression. Yes. He says he felt the darkness growing in Ben. He tried to help him, but it only seemed to grow stronger. He says that he did go to Ben's room with the lightsaber, but he couldn't go through with it. He couldn't kill his family. Unfortunately, Ben woke up, saw the lightsaber, became afraid, and proceeded to let his hate, his fear, and his anger pour out of him. When Luke woke up, the school was destroyed and the students were gone, either dead or missing. Ray becomes angry with Luke, asking why he took his lightsaber with him at all. Why didn't he try the million other ways there could have been to help Ben? She accuses him of sending her, Han, and Chewie off on the Falcon so that he could kill her brother without interference. Luke looks ashamed. He tells Ray that it was a mistake to let her stay, and she should leave the next morning. Luke leaves, and Ray sits there, sad, still a little angry with both Luke and Ben, and very confused. Then she notices a cup at her feet, one of the things Ben used the Force on in his anger. She picks it up and looks at it curiously for a minute. We go back to the Resistance. Keela tells Ray that originally she was on her way to tell them that an outpost of theirs in the Outer Rim was now under First Order control, and that more were falling every day, as were the people manning the outposts. But as she was preparing to land, she saw a fleet of First Order ships entering the system. They were still a ways off, so they have some time, but they have to evacuate if they want to survive. Leia immediately issues the evacuation order. We see Beaumont and Finn starting to back up, then erase the computers, and the pilots heading for their ships and transports. Key asks Poe what she can do to help, which leads to Rose commenting, "I thought you didn't want to get involved." Since the Resistance knows that Keela doesn't really want to be part of their cause, they all, except Poe, Leia, BB-8, and Finn, treat her a bit coolly. Both Key and Poe give Rose a look before she runs off to her transport. Poe asks Key to make sure that Finn and Beaumont get out safely, and Key says she'll get them both out on the Shadow. They kiss quickly, telling each other to be careful, and then Poe runs to help with the evacuation. K4 whispers for BB-8 to "Watch that 6." BB-8 beeps that he will, and then rolls off after Poe. Keela tells K4 to go get the Shadow ready for takeoff. K4 nods, then runs toward the ship. Key looks at Finn and Beaumont, who are still messing with the computers, and she asks if everything is backed up. Beaumont says that it is. He'll hand Finn a drive as he talks, but that it'll take another minute to destroy the data. Alarms start to go off, indicating the First Order is there. Key will say, "And I thought hunting them out to Skywalker would be the thing that got me killed." She pushes the boys out of the way, then pulls out her blasters and proceeds to shoot all of the computers in the room. She smiles at the boys. "Data destroyed. Now let's get you guys out of here." Beaumont asks what she is as she hurries them to the Shadow, to which she'll respond, "I'm just a bounty hunter trying to keep you people alive." They see the other transports taking off and people getting on others, including Leia getting onto Rose's. We see Poe's X-Wing squadron in the air, trying desperately to protect the transports from the TIEs, but some of them still get shot down. We go up to the Star Destroyer and see Hux issuing the command to Phasma that they're not taking prisoners. Burn everything to the ground. Phasma will take the order happily, and Hux will be watching the fight with an evil smile. Keela gets on the Shadow, and as they start to take off, she sees that K4 looks like Poe again. She yells at him to knock it off, reasoning that she doesn't need to be confused as to where Poe is during this particular life and death situation. K4 says she'll need the help of a great pilot to get out of this fight in peace. She tells him to pick another one. He's seen plenty in his lifetime. He asks if he can become Jason. She says fine, and K4 becomes a half-human, half-alien. About 30 with pointed, green-tinted ears. In my head, played by Matt Smith. And they begin to pilot through the fight. Finn and Beaumont get on the guns and start firing at the TIE fighters, which we'll see are being commanded by Phasma and Ben. Keela switches the communication equipment to the resistance frequency and starts asking where they're going. Rose's voice comes over saying that she doesn't know. Most of their allies have abandoned them and the old places aren't safe anymore. Key is stunned and asks Poe if he just got her involved in an evacuation with nowhere to evacuate to. K4 chimes in, using Jason's voice. This wasn't very smart of you. This is why Mom and I have stayed in the bounty hunting game instead of joining the resistance. Key gives K4 a dirty look. Poe asks who K4 is pretending to be now, and K4 responds, Jason Syndulla. Fans of Star Wars Rebels might recognize the name as that of the half-human Jedi, half-Twi'lek son of Kanan Jarrus, Caleb Doom, and Hera Syndulla. The name Syndulla will at least perk some ears. Poe says, seriously? And Keela makes the point that they're in a dogfight with the First Order with nowhere to go, and without Poe, she needed help. Finn shouts that if they don't get out soon, it won't matter what K4 looks like because they'll all be dead. To which K4 responds that so long as his head is intact, he'll be fine. All of his vital systems are in his head, meaning that he can take multiple blaster bolts or stabs to his body and be perfectly fine. Poe asks if anyone knows a safe place for them to go. Key and K4 share a look. K4 shakes his head and whispers, that's a last resort. We may be at the point of a last resort, Key responds with a nervous expression. We see Leia on Rose's transport. She's getting off a separate communication device. She types some coordinates into the Navi computer and says that they still have one friend out there, and they're waiting for them at the coordinates she just sent to the fleet. The Resistance ships start to go into hyperspace. Ben gets Leia and Rose's ship in his sights. We see Leia trying to communicate with him through the Force, and ultimately, he can't do it. We'll hear Hux shouting at him to take the shot and ask what he's waiting for. Unfortunately, right as Rose activates the hyperdrive, Phasma comes out of nowhere and grazes them. Ben looks a bit worried when he sees the strike, but he quickly shuts down those feelings. In hyperspace, we see that Rose's ship is mostly intact, though she and Leia both have minor injuries. We hear Beaumont's voice frantically asking if they're okay and if they made it. Rose assures him that they're all right and that they'll see him on the ground. But we see that something is damaged and leaking some form of gas into their ship, which neither of them is noticing. On the shadow, we see a relieved Beaumont leaning back in his seat, taking a deep breath, as Finn asks Keela where they're going. She looks at the coordinates and says, we're heading to Crate. Back on Act 2, the sun is beginning to rise, and Rey and Chewie are preparing the Millennium Falcon to leave. Things are clearly weighing heavy on Rey's mind, and she thinks about the pit. She wants to learn all about all sides of the Force, and see if maybe there is a way to overcome the darkness, thinking that that is the only way to save Ben from himself. She tells Chewie that she'll be right back and heads for the pit. When she reaches it, she gets on her hands and knees and looks in. Her hand slips and she falls in. She lands in a lake at the bottom and quickly climbs onto the shore. It's a dark and misty cave, but there's a bit of light coming through the hole. She starts to look around and hears the sound of someone in pain. She runs towards it and finds Finn being tortured by Ben in his Kylo Ren mask, using Force lightning. He stops when he sees Rey and tells her the only way to save her friend is to strike him down, and the only way to do that is to embrace her anger, her hate, and her fear. Rey looks at Finn. He looks badly hurt and is reaching out to her, saying her name and pleading for help. She begs Ben to stop and tells him that he doesn't have to do this, but he says she must choose, kill him or let her only friend die. He raises his hand to zap Finn again, and Rey jumps to shield Finn. She covers him with her body while holding up her hand. The lightning hits her hand and sort of gathers in it for a moment, like Yoda did in the prequels. For a moment, it looks like she might aim it at Ben, but then she redirects it to the cave ceiling. The dust and rubble that falls on them causes Rey to look away, still trying to shield Finn. And when she looks back, Ben is gone. She starts to drag Finn to the lake, and she rips a piece of her outfit to get a cloth. But before she does anything, Finn asks why she didn't give in and kill Kylo Ren. He gave her every reason. She says that she used her anger to hold the lightning, but she didn't let it have control over her. She still had the strength to redirect it. She won't kill her brother, but she won't let him kill her friends. She then tells him to hold still so that she can patch him up. She dips the cloth in the lake and starts to ask how he got there, but when she looks back, Finn is gone. The water in the lake rises, pulls Rey in, and then shoots her back out of the pit. Once she's on the shore, Rey smiles, realizing that what just happened was a test by the Force, and she heads back to the Falcon, not noticing that Luke witnessed the whole thing. We see the Resistance fleet come out of hyperspace and land on Crate. The planet itself is going to stay the same, covered in salt with red soil underneath. The Resistance base is inside a giant mountain. We'll even see the Diamond Fox creatures scatter as the ships come in. We'll see Maz waving them into the base. She's the one Leia had been talking to. The Shadow can't fly in with the transports and X-Wings, so they land in a large area behind the mountain where there is a back door, which Maz will tell them about over the comms. Rose's transport is the last to come in for a landing. Beaumont, Finn, and K4, now in his droid form, have made it into the base by this point. Beaumont tries to contact Rose to tell her she's coming in too hot, but we see that both Rose and Leia are barely conscious. Poe gets out of his X-Wing just in time to see the transport crash at the entrance. Everyone moves quickly to the wreck. Leia uses the Force to break the windshield, and then she passes out. Beaumont grabs the unconscious Rose, while Poe and Finn get Leia out just before the ship explodes, knocking everyone down. We'll see Rey, Luke, and Ben all sense Leia is hurt. Ben and Rey react a little less strongly than Luke, but only a little. Maz quickly comes over to them as Keela makes sure Poe and Finn are okay. Maz says that Leia and Rose both need a doctor, but none of the Resistance doctors made it there, and the people there only have basic first aid training. Keela says that K4 can become a doctor. He's seen more than a few in his time with her, and knows just about everything about caring for someone. Beaumont and some of the others aren't sure they trust her droid with Rose and Leia, but Poe vouches for Keela, with Maz pointing out that right now, Poe is the closest thing to a leader the Resistance has. Poe realizes that he has to lead and take care of these people now. He takes a breath and then immediately tells K4 to take care of Leia and Rose while the rest of them work to fortify the base. They all know that the First Order won't be far behind them. Back on Act 2, Rey pounds on Luke's door, begging him to come and help her save Leia and her friends. She says that they need them and that he can't stay here hiding from the darkness forever. Luke doesn't respond. We see him crying in the dark of his hut. Rey talks to him through the door, saying that he was the hero of the rebellion. He was the one who saw good in her father and inspired him to become a hero. He saved her mother more than once and brought Anakin back to the light. She believes in him, and she knows that he could be that man again. Luke still doesn't respond. We see Rey backing off, saying she's going. She's not going to let her family and friends die. Not when there's still hope that she could help them. And then Rey slowly starts to walk down to the Falcon, breaking into a run once she's away from the hut. We'll see Luke sitting in the dark of his house when a familiar voice asks, "Why sit alone in this house, in this place, do you?" Luke looks up and sees the Force ghost of Yoda. He's happy to see his old master, but when Yoda asks why he's not helping his friends, he says there's nothing he can do. Yoda points out that in the past, Luke stopped his own training to save his friends when there was nothing he could truly do to help them. Luke replies, "That was the past, and what I did and who I was back then doesn't matter." Yoda hits him hard with his walking stick. When Luke asks why he did that, Yoda responds, "It matters not. In the past it is." This is still produced by Disney, so I feel I can get away with this Lion King reference. Yoda tells him that who he was in the past is still who he is now. He's just buried it under self-pity and misery. Luke says he doesn't want to live like this anymore, and Yoda says, "A way to change that, there is." Back on Crate, the Resistance has pretty much barricaded themselves inside the cave, using both the door and pieces of Rose's crashed transport. Poe asks Maz where she found this place, and she says that it's an old Separatist stronghold, left to rot after the Clone Wars. It's revealed that since her home was destroyed, Maz had been working with Leia to get this place ready if the First Order really managed to cut the Resistance off from their allies. Maz asks Poe who Keela is, as she's clearly not Resistance. Yet. He doesn't answer at first, but then Maz says that they may die in a matter of hours, and there's no point in taking secrets to his grave. Poe tells Maz that Keela is his wife. She works as a bounty hunter, and he piloted for her before the Resistance. They'd known each other since they were children and had loved each other just as long. They got married shortly before the First Order truly took power. The plan was to take what they'd made bounty hunting and retire on a nice, quiet planet in the Outer Rim, where whatever happened in the core wouldn't affect them. But then came the First Order. Poe felt a sense of duty to the Resistance, not because he really stood for anything, but because an old friend, Jason Syndulla, who he says had been leading the Resistance in the Outer Rim, but as quietly and secretly as possible, asked for his help on a job, and once he was in, he started to believe in fighting for the cause. Key didn't want any part of it, saying it wasn't their fight, but he made the point that so long as they live in this galaxy, it was their fight. Poe had also told her that the quiet life they'd dreamed of is what he'd fight for. A life and a family with her that they couldn't safely have so long as the First Order was in power. Keela told him that if he stayed, she would help when she could, but she wasn't going to pledge herself to any cause. Maz smiles and says, "I think she's beginning to change her mind about that." Poe looks and sees Key running all over the place. Keela seems to be trying to help everybody. Poe looks a little happy, then he feels the ground rumble beneath him. He looks out the door and can see something in the distance. He uses his viewfinder and sees that the First Order has landed and is about to begin an assault. Poe looks at Maz. He asks if there are any other ships in the base they can use since they only have a few X-Wings but plenty of pilots. Maz shows him some hunks of junk, like the ones that were used in The Last Jedi, but not in quite as bad of condition. These will actually be able to get a little further off the ground. Poe's less than enthusiastic, but Maz says that she had to make a choice between weapons and ships, and she chose weapons. She'll open a crate full of rocket launchers, blast rifles, and detonators. Poe kisses her on the cheek when he sees these. Also, the junk is the best she could do while in hiding since the First Order has taken over Takodana. And then we hear Rose behind them saying that, "If it has an engine, I can fly it." Poe looks relieved as he starts to move to her. Beaumont runs to her and kisses her the minute she speaks, with Rose whispering to him that she's okay. Poe asks how she is. She smiles and says that she survived a crash and still looks like she's doing better than he is. This gets a chuckle from everyone, but they look at Leia and see that she's not doing well, though Dr. K4 assures them that he will make her well again. Key is at a control panel and calls Poe and Beaumont over. They come and see that she's looking at an exterior camera feed. It shows AT-ATs and TIE fighters inbound. Again, we'll see Hux on a Star Destroyer. This time he's angry, but still keeping his cool. His orders are simply to crush the Resistance once and for all. Poe asks Rose if she thinks she can fly the junk ships, and she responds that she can fly anything. Poe tells everybody with an X-Wing to get in it, and everybody without to find their hunk of junk, while those who can't fly will fight in the trench with the weapons Maz got them, and try their best to slow down the AT-ATs. Everyone scrambles. Key asks if he wants her in the air or on the ground, and he says, "In the air. You're one of the best flyers I've ever seen." Key smiles. "I had a good teacher." Poe will chuckle lightly. "Thank you, but the Shadow also has the best weapons and might be the best match for the walkers." Keela nods and heads to the back door. Finn asks if he needs to go with her to co-pilot, but Poe tells him that he needs him to stay and guard Leia. Maz will go with Key. Maz nods and runs towards the back door. Finn grabs a blaster and takes his spot beside Leia and K4, though he's clearly nervous. Poe will say, "Don't worry, Finn. You can do this. I wouldn't trust this to anybody other than my little brother. You got me off that Star Destroyer. You survived a fight with the most terrifying man I've ever had the displeasure of meeting, and you can do this." Finn will nod. Poe will tell him that he'll see Finn when he gets back, and then Poe and BB-8 head for his X-Wing. K4 will call after BB-8 and ask him to keep their dad and mum, Poe and Keela, safe up there. BB-8 beeps that he always does. The assault will play out close to how it did originally, except no battering ram, cannon, and no suicide run from Rose. Just a straight-up assault. This will be a little bit like the Battle of Hoth, only with salt and red dirt instead of snow. Poe will be leading the squadron in the air. At one point, BB-8 will beep something worriedly, and Poe will say, "Happy beeps, buddy, happy beeps." I liked that part in the original, just not where it was placed and not when it was used as the "I've got a bad feeling about this" moment. Rose will be in charge of the junk squad, and is just barely above the ground, and Beaumont is leading the ground troops in the trench. The fight is not going well for our heroes. The Resistance is vastly outnumbered and outgunned by the First Order. We'll cut inside to Finn and K4 getting worried. K4 will see some sort of message on one of the computers. He'll go to it. Finn will be too focused on Leia to notice what K4 is doing. K4 types something and then comes back to Finn, saying that he has an idea in case the First Order gets in. K4 will walk over to a table and rip the top off of it, which makes Finn look very concerned and go, "Oh, I've got a bad feeling about this." Back in the battle, Keela and Maz manage to take down one of the AT-ATs, but it exploding knocks out their weapons, so Key has to do some fancy flying while Maz tries to fix the weapons. Poe is doing all right against the TIEs, but one of them has him in their crosshairs. The TIE fighter suddenly explodes, and Poe sees the Millennium Falcon fly over him. Rey? But it's Chewie and R2. Poe is thrilled to see them and asks where Rey is. But before he gets his answer, Key says that she saw a man in black and a silver stormtrooper going into the base through the back door. Poe realizes that Kylo Ren is using this battle as a distraction to get to Leia, but he knows he can't do anything. He has to keep fighting with his people. We cut inside and see Finn with Leia, who is sitting up. Finn looks like he's about to talk to her, but before he says anything, Ben and Phasma appear. Ben chokes Finn, which makes him drop his blaster, and then throws him to the side. Leia looks at Ben. "Please don't do this." Ben looks conflicted. He hesitates while Phasma moves to Finn and aims her blaster at his head. Foolish boy. You're as pathetic as you were when we took you. Finn will have a flash to his dream about getting ripped out of someone's arms, and then Phasma will continue. No matter. As I told you on Starkiller Base, FN2187, I am going to take great pleasure in killing you, and this time you won't get away. There's no one to protect you. Suddenly, a blue lightsaber cuts off the end of Phasma's blaster, and she is pushed back. Rey stands between Phasma and Finn. Finn said, Rey? Rey helps him up and hugs him. Ben looks at them as Leia smiles. Once again, he claims that Anakin's lightsaber belongs to him, and he tries to pull it to him, but Rey is using the Force to keep it, which causes it to break. Rey pulls the pieces to her, but then Ben says, Join me, or she dies, and he points his saber at Leia. Rey shakes her head and begs Ben not to do it. Ben realizes she will not be turned, so he starts to swing at Leia, but his blade is blocked by a blade of green. It's Luke, and Ben is shocked. Luke forces Ben to back away from Leia. He tells Ben that he's sorry for failing him, and he will do everything he can to help him now. Ben says, going full Kylo, that if he wants to help him, then he can die like Han. They begin to fight while Rey and Finn fight Phasma, who is wielding her spear. Rey and Finn are having trouble avoiding the spear, and but they're holding their own, with Rey using the Force to throw things at Phasma. Luke keeps trying to talk Ben down, but it's clear that right now, all his hate and anger are in control. Phasma kicks Finn in the head, calling him a weakling, and zaps Rey with the spear to the point she collapses on the ground. Leia picks up Finn's blaster and fires at Phasma, but the bolts ricochet off her armor. Leia keeps firing as Phasma walks to her and then stabs her in the stomach. This gets Ben's attention as he looks on with shock and horror across his face, almost like he's been snapped back to reality. Mother! But as Phasma pulls the spear out of Leia, Leia looks down at her wound, then back up at Phasma, and then punches her hard enough to knock her down. Leia then becomes Jason, who flips to Rey and Finn and helps both of them up before returning to his K4 form. Ben is confused and still a little shocked. Luke says that Ben's reaction says so much, that he is not completely lost to the darkness yet. Ben then tries to stab Luke, but the blade goes right through him. And Luke asks, Did you really think it would be easy to destroy the people that love you? Luke's Force projection disappears, and we see that he's really holding Leia's hand on the Falcon. Leia's still weak, but clearly not dying. We'll see the tabletop that K4 ripped off leaning against the wall. The implication is that they used it to transport Leia aboard. Luke smiles at her and gives her Han's dice. Chewie would roar at him, and Leia says, Welcome home. Back in the base, Ben sees that K4, Rey, and Finn have disappeared. The Shadow is at the back door to pick them up, and Chewie is getting the junk squad and the ground troops out in the Falcon. Rose pulls the injured Beaumont, he's missing an arm, and some of his men onto the ship just before they have to take off. Poe in his X-Wing asks if they have everyone, to which Rose responds, Everyone that's alive, but where are we going? Keela says that she knows a place. It's a little moon the First Order doesn't know about. She scouted it as a last resort for the Resistance, just in case they were in a desperate situation. The Resistance could be safe there for a while. She sends the coordinates to the fleet, and they all take off into hyperspace, while Ben screams at the sky in both anger and agony. Later, we see the Resistance land on a small moon that text will tell us is called Kamar. It's a lush jungle planet with many lakes and rivers. There are some old ruins where the fleet lands. Key tells K4, who looks like he's carrying a box of mechanical scraps, to become a doctor again and take care of all the wounded. Leia and Beaumont included, and they'll be accompanied by Rose, Luke, and Chewie. Poe and BB-8 come over to her as Maz, Finn, and Rey come off the shadow. BB-8 rolls around them while beeping happily, and after confirming that they're all okay, Poe hugs Finn, then kisses Keela. Maz would excuse herself to go check on the wounded, Rey saying she would be there in a minute. Poe asks if Finn still has the drive from the old base, which Finn shows he does, and then asks him to help get the new base set up. Finn says he will, but asks for a minute with Rey. Poe and Key take the hint and walk away with BB-8 to inspect the rest of the fleet. Poe will ask if she's going to stick around for a while, and Key says, "I could be persuaded," which would lead to Poe pulling her close and kissing her on the temple. Finn and Rey both lean against the shadow. They both look like they could use some rest. Rey smiles at Finn and says she is so happy to see him, and that she's missed him a lot. Finn says that he's missed her too, and that there's a lot he wants to talk to her about. He looks at the pieces of Anakin's lightsaber and that she's holding and says that he's sorry she lost it. Rey looks at the pieces and says maybe she can fix what she helped break, harkening back to Finn's line from the first film, which will make Finn ask if she's staying, and Rey will say that's her plan unless the Force decides otherwise. Finn says that's what he wanted to talk to her about. He'll quickly tell her about all his dreams, about all the dreams he's been having, and about the strange feelings he's been getting. Rey will look at him with a smile, grab hold of his hand and say, "So, you finally felt what I have all along." We'll cut to what is fast becoming a makeshift hospital. K4, Lieutenant Connix, Maz, and a few of the other young Resistance fighters are patching up everyone. K4's primary focus is on Beaumont's severed limb. He's taking things out of his scrap box and building a metal arm. He tells Beaumont that it's not going to be very pretty, but it will serve the same function as the limb he lost and likely protect him better. He adds that once there aren't quite so many injured, he'll see if he can make him a better one. As he begins to attach the arm, we move over to Leia, who is being looked after by Chewie and Luke. Leia keeps telling Chewie, who keeps fussing over her, that she's okay, just weak, and that she's survived worse. Luke will hold her hand and say, "There's not much worse than this." Leia would give him a look and remind him that she was there for every single minute of the rebellion. Rey and Finn would come in to check on her, Rey hugging her mother tight while Finn hangs back a bit. Leia assures Rey that she'll be fine in a few days. Maz would chime in that it's more like a few weeks. Rey looks at Luke and asks if he's going to disappear again. Luke will shake his head and say that he's finally ready to join the fight. Rey will grab his and Leia's hands while Chewie hugs Rey from behind. Finn will watch all of this with a smile as Maz comes over to him and notices that he has a piece of Anakin's lightsaber. Finn says Rey told him he would need something to start from. She also told him that he would need a master. He and Maz share a look, and we'll transition to an angle where Finn and Maz's backs are to us, and we're looking straight at the Skywalker Solo family. Cut to credits. One of the biggest complaints lobbied at The Force Awakens was that it was essentially a remake of A New Hope, just with a few new characters and a mildly different plot chucked in. And I sort of agree with that. I get the feeling that the goal with The Last Jedi was to do something completely different. I really do applaud Rian Johnson for trying to do something truly original and unique with The Last Jedi. It certainly is unlike anything else in all of Star Wars. It has a few good ideas and some truly stunning visuals. And if it had been the first movie in this new trilogy, it might have been better received. But it's not. When you're doing a sequel and certain things have been established about both the characters and the plot, then you elect to disregard everything from plot points to characterization and top it off with giving us new stuff that either leads nowhere or winds up getting retconned in the next film, it will likely confuse the audience to the point that it leaves a bad taste in their mouths. Cutting down on the subplots and character moments that are ultimately meaningless would really help this movie not be such a slog to get through. It would still allow Rey to grow in her powers without her having to be clueless. It allows Luke to come to grips with his past failings while also finding hope in the future. It will give us an insight into Poe and what he fights for without having to force his character to make the stupidest of decisions. It allows Finn to grow as a character, still giving us hints to his past without spelling it all out, so that there's still a bit of mystery with him, but we are at least able to confirm, in my version, that he is, or is actually going to be, a Jedi. Bringing Maz, Beaumont, and Rose along as our primary side characters ensures that we don't waste great characters or actors, and making sure that the villains are menacing ensures that we can actually worry about our heroes going into the next film. Instead, in The Last Jedi, we got a fragile old guy in a bathrobe killed as soon as he starts to become interesting, an incompetent, shouty, arrogant idiot who gets smacked around constantly, a monologuing sad boy who seems to lose his grip on reality by the end of the film, and a soldier so easily beaten and killed off that she may as well have been one of the copy-paste stormtroopers. I believe that the streamlined and simplified plot would make the whole film easier and more enjoyable to watch. I don't hate The Last Jedi. As I said, some of the visual work alone is worth giving it a watch. But as a sequel to something as long awaited as a Star Wars movie, it felt more like Attack of the Clones than The Empire Strikes Back. I believe that The Fallen would have continued the story, done right by the characters, still given us cool visual elements. Visually, the Battle of Crate would be very close to The Last Jedi, and introduced us to a couple of new faces in Keela and K4 that hopefully would appeal to the audience without taking away from the story or established characters. Now that that's done, we still have one more film to write, and I think I'll have my work cut out for me. But that will have to wait until next week. Come back for the epic conclusion of What If I Wrote the Star Wars sequel trilogy. Thank you so much for joining me today. I have absolutely loved doing this, and I'm looking forward to the ending next week. Let me know if you guys like these what ifs, because I will be happy to try to do some more. I already have one written, one partially written, and ideas for several others. So let me know if these are videos that you guys like, so I know to start making more. Be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe, and ring that little notification bell so that you are always aware of when we upload.